Hello, in this video we're working in Unit 5 on Chapter 33, and that's the last physical chapter in our textbook. And the topic for Chapter 33 is as shown here, which is Java server faces. And this is a fairly modern approach for Java in terms of creating content and programs that will ultimately be generated as a web page. Instead of outputting to the console or outputting to a graphical environment, we output to a web page. So that's a little bit different than what we've been doing. Now, doing this work will actually be best done by using NetBeans. And the reason for that is NetBeans has many of the components built into it to help us accelerate our workflow. In other words, a lot of the add-ons and stuff like we were doing with Eclipse, we don't have to go through that process of downloading the right version and throwing them in and making sure they work. NetBeans just includes them. The other reason for using NetBeans is just for us to get used to the fact that it's actually a very good IDE, alternate tool from Eclipse. It's also free. I know a lot of people that work with Java prefer it over Eclipse, and there's kind of like camps, but they're really both very good pieces of software. Of course, you can code in other languages within NetBeans, most notably HTML and PHP and CSS and JavaScript, amongst others. So it really is a very powerful tool. Now, in terms of just what Java server faces are, let's take a look at the description here. It says it's a new technology for developing server-side web applications. Now, that is comparable to, let's say, working with PHP or ASP.NET, where we use a programming language that runs on the server. So we need server-side components that will execute the code. And then that code programmatically will create our HTML, which would then be served to the client, which is the browser, in order to render the content. So it's really a pretty powerful approach because you can see all the different things that Java can do, and then taking that capability and unleashing it as a web page is kind of a very modern thing to do. We very often these days run many of our applications through a web browser, and this is kind of Java's answer to that. Now, there are some other technologies out there, for example, like Java Server Pages, which we're going to take a look at a little bit later in the course. But my focus here, just as it was with the Java effect, is to show you the newer, more cutting-edge approaches, because ultimately that's where things are going. And I think it is more important than learning old stuff. Not that you wouldn't understand the concepts of those, but those, they're on their way out pretty much. So let's focus on the new things. The other thing that is going to be important here is that we are going to be working with not only these technologies here, but we're going to be working with server software, and that's the built-in web server Glassfish that comes with NetBeans. So that's what's going to actually render our pages for us. And then instead of working with the standard level of Java, we're going to be working with the Java EE version, which stands for Enterprise Edition. And that has some additional features and functions that are designed for working server-side that regular Java does not have incorporated in it. All right, so the first thing they're going to get us to do here is actually just take a really quick look at how things operate. Now, we will need to install NetBeans. So if that's not a piece of software that you have installed, you will need to go and do that. And now is a good time. So I'm going to pause here momentarily, and then I'll bring up some resources on the screen that will show you how to get to the spot where that software can be downloaded and installed. Okay, so I've jumped over into our Unit 5 folder within the course shell. And if you scroll down a ways, you'll see that I've actually added a link to NetBeans directly within the assignment. So let's go ahead and click that link, and then we'll land on this page. Zoom. And you can see that NetBeans actually comes in a number of different flavors. So if we wanted, we could, work with the SE version. And that's basically what we've been doing so far. But notice that the SE version of NetBeans does include Java effects, but it does not cover a lot of these other things that we might want to use. So if you scroll all the way to this last column, you can see that we get all the features, including the capability of working with HTML5, PHP, and C and C++. So that's a pretty powerful combination of things. It also comes with these bundled servers, and these servers are designed to render content, server side. And as I mentioned before, this will be what runs things on the back end and then displays the pages. So it's the software that serves the pages to the user. So out of all these, there's no reason not to go ahead and download this version. You may actually find that working with these technologies within NetBeans will be something you like as well. So I always encourage people to try different editors. You never know which one you'll like. And this is free and it's powerful, so what more can you say? So once you go ahead and do that download, you will get to this point here, and it will ask you to do the install. And I'm looking for the spot where that is, and it doesn't actually indicate that. So let me go find those instructions, and I'm pausing for just a moment. Okay, I'm not finding a concise set of instructions, but from my memory of doing this a little while back, it really is a pretty simple process. If there's any components that already exist on your system, such as all the Java libraries, it recognizes that and doesn't overwrite them. And it will add whatever components are missing to make it a full-blown version of the complete NetBeans software. Now, in terms of actually doing this first set of work here, let's go ahead and launch NetBeans, and I have my shortcut right there. It might actually behoove me to actually pin it to the taskbar. I guess I already have. All right, so we'll just let that load up really quick. All right, and here's our interface. And you can see that we've already been working on some stuff in class here. And there is a start page which you can always close. But if you notice that the interface here is actually not that foreign looking. Just like Eclipse, we have a lot of our components that we're working with will be loaded up here on the left. And although it's a little bit different sort of tree structure, it really is not that dissimilar. We also have an output window here at the bottom where we would see console output or error messages and the like. And then we also have this navigator area. Now I'm going to actually go ahead and pull up one of the pages that I have pre-created from working on some of these assignments. And you can see the format here of some of the documents, and you can see it color codes nicely. It does a lot of automatic indenting, code suggestions, all the things you would really expect from working with a robust IDE. And notice that here we have like a mix of various file types, including XHTML, and that's not a mistake. Even though we're working in a HTML5 world, there's some components of XHTML which are a little bit stricter than HTML5. And then we can also mix in regular XML, if you notice here, to do some of the work that's required. Now, there's a number of different files that we have here, and I'm just kind of quickly jumping through them so you can see what some of these look like. And this is from working most of the way through the first few examples. So you get an idea of what that is. And then notice as we are within a file, it also brings up all the different components that are built in, whether it's a variable or a method or whatever. There's a tree here that shows us. Notice also that we can jump various modes here where we can see the actual file structure directly within here, as opposed to the project structure, which is a little bit different. And then you can also see which services are attached. You know, for example, which web services are running. And you can see there's a bunch of different ones, or which databases we're attaching to. And this is not too dissimilar from working with like Visual Studio, for example, where some of these things are included in your Solution Explorer. And here they happen a little bit more automatically. So I'm kind of a fan of doing that. All right, let's go back to the book now and try to press forward with the material. And we're going to go through these steps. Now, I've already completed some of these, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull some of it up on the screen so you can see it. But you're going to go ahead and you're going to go up to File, New, and you're going to do a new project, and then you get these interfaces here. And then notice right away all the different things that you have available to you on the side, including, and this is kind of nice, samples for work in all those different categories. If you wanted to, let's say, look at some PHP stuff or some Enterprise Edition things, you can see there's lots of stuff there. Web services, HTML and JavaScript, including working with a bunch of different libraries that are available. See all the Java effects things that you can do, regular Java stuff. So you really get an idea that this is really robust and really does have a lot to offer. So if you really love Eclipse, I understand, but I would implore you to at least give this a shot, and who knows, you might like it. All right, so the next instruction step is to create this particular demo. Now, I've already done that, so I'm going to let you perform these steps, but you are going to fill in the name of the project after you select here. So you are going to choose Java Web and then Web Application. So you would go Java Web and Web Application, and then you will hit Next. Now, given the fact that I've already done this, I'm actually just going to rename what the example is. I'm going to say Java JSF Demo 2 or JSF2 Demo 2, whether it's any version of Windows if you start off the root. So I've been putting my stuff in these folders here, and I'm trying to remember if I put it in my workspace 2 or if I just put it in NetBeans project. So I guess I'm going to put it in NetBeans project. So let's just say okay to that. And I'm not worried about using dedicated libraries at this point unless they tell me to. Okay, so the next step is to click next to look at the servers and the settings that go with them. So let's go ahead and do that. And then you can see that we will have our choice here of the different server formats that we could use. And right now, we are just using Glassfish, which is fine. And if you wanted to use the Apache Tomcat, you would have been presented with that option during the install. Technically, it really doesn't matter which one you use. Out in the field, the one that's used probably most often is Tomcat when you're working in an open source environment using Apache. But Glassfish is actually quite a good server, and mostly it's used for development, but it doesn't really matter which one you choose ultimately, because both essentially do the same thing. Now, I also want to point out to you that you can choose which version of Java you're going to work with. And as far as the Enterprise Edition goes, we have Java EE7, which is the one I recommend that you stick with. Everything else there should be okay. All right, and this is what the screens look like. So if you want to follow along with screenshots, there you go. And let's click Next. And notice that they want us to check Java server faces. And now please notice that these are what we call frameworks. So frameworks, when we're working in an IDE, are really a collection of tools that become available to us so we can accelerate workflow. In this case, that is our preferred tool. All right, and you can see some of the components that are listed there. And these are really going to be fine. We don't really need to make any additional tweak. So let's just go ahead and click Finish. And now you can see that it created a second set of project files here, or tree structure, so that we can look at it. By default, it is creating a index.xhtml page. And if you're wondering about that as a whole approach, the reason that we're using XML kind of as the core here, and actually that extra character there, is so that the content is parsed a certain way by the server-side server. And there's reasons for doing that. And the primary reason is when we're using XML, we are allowed to create our own tags. We can define our own tags. And as you can already see from the content on this page, that there are tags that are not native to HTML. And therefore, we can just go ahead and create whatever tags we want, literally, within an XML document. But we still want it to render as a web page. So we basically have double doc types happening here. And I know that's a little confusing initially, but go with the flow and get this work done. Okay, let's move on now and move to this exercise. So that we're going to create a basic page, and what's interesting about this is some of the terminology that's used. Now notice that this is known as a facelet, and that's kind of interesting in and of itself, that it kind of has like a different little name. And I got to think about like the fact that when we're creating a web page, that is something the client sees or faces, and that I think that's where a lot of that terminology comes from. But if you explore how that document looks, like we just did, you're going to see a lot of different things about it. But then the author goes into this little bit here where he talks about the XML declarations. Now, there is a little bit of back and forth between some people about do I really want to use a .xhtml extension? Wouldn't this work with HTML5? Now the answer to that basically is it might. But I think that in order to make sure that it does, you might want to stick with the stuff that's in the book. Most notably because when you look at these, doc type declarations in NetBeans, and you look at them carefully, you'll notice that aside from just the regular HTML tag here, that we have what they call XML namespaces. And it is, absolutely possible to create HTML5 documents. It would be possible for me to just actually strike this and everything would work. But the namespace would still need to point to this. And we also have an additional namespace that is very specific to Java server spaces or faces, excuse me, that we do need to have in there so that everything renders as intended. We still will need the double doc type here at the top, and although you might not recognize this is a doc type, that really is what it is. All right, it just indicates, like when we do our HTML5 documents, what coding language you're using, what version, and the encoding. So that's not really too mysterious. All right, so he goes through and explains the structure of all that, and you can read that on your own. I think it pretty much covered it already. And if you look at the code that's here, they're going ahead and they're rendering it. So what we need to do now in NetBeans is actually go up here and run the project. So we're just going to run it. All right, and what this is doing, notice that there's some database stuff going on in the background. The Glassfish server is running. Now, the very first time that we launch it, it takes a little time because we are literally loading up a piece of software, and you can see the server log as it goes through all its processes. But once Glassfish is up and running, subsequent page loads will be much, much quicker. Thank you very much, Microsoft. But you can see that this is running just fine here, and we're getting exactly what we would participate from this information. All right, back over to our text. Now, we have a new structure here to concern ourselves with, and actually a couple different things that I'm noticing here. The first thing is this whole concept of Java beans. And as it indicates here, it says that a Java bean class is simply a public Java class with a no-arg constructor, and that contains particular properties. So it'll actually have kind of like basically a class that we can pull on to do particular tasks. And we've seen this by working with different libraries, but Java beans are kind of these standalone little things that are publicly available. So people come up with stuff that's reusable and they share it with other people, and it's actually kind of a cool thing. Now, the other thing that we're going to concern ourselves with is this whole concept of MVC architecture. And you can see that stands for Model, View, and Controller. Now, those of you that are fortunate enough to have already taken our Ruby on Rails class, or maybe even currently in it at the same time, because they usually run in the same semester as this course, you'll be familiar a little bit with this whole MVC thing. Those that might also be familiar with it are those that are already have taken the ASP.NET courses, and depending on who you took it with and their teaching style, you may have touched upon this to various degrees. But this is actually a very modern approach to developing web-based applications, and actually the concept really transfers to all application development. But the point is essentially that certain components of the application that we're building will be built in little chunks with specific functions. And by doing that, by separating things, we end up having less code repetition and easy to add features and remove features. And it really is a very modern, more agile approach to development. Now, since we're on that topic, I'm actually going to jump down to my desktop here. And I have this little image here that I borrowed from some other textbook. But basically, this kind of shows a little bit of a graphic as to how MVC applications work on the web. Now, our users, whoever uses our application, will be interacting with the browser. The browser will have some sort of a screen or form or interactivity components available where the user can either click on something or enter in some information or have some sort of a mouse action or keyboard action that will then send a request off to the controller that is associated with that particular action. Now, you can have many controllers even attached to one page or website. When the action that needs to be processed comes to the controller then has code that's written, programming code, so in this case it would be our Java, that decides what to do with that. So we'll have little methods set up and routines that will perform specific actions. Now, one specific action might be just to take us to a different page, in which case it'll generate that page, pulling in whatever components it needs, and then in this capacity here, we'll have certain frameworks already built or certain templates already built where we're going to inject content and then serve that page back to the browser so the user can either further interact or read it or whatever they're going to do. Now, the controller is also responsible for interacting with the model and therefore the database. And very often applications will have a database on the back end holding all the information. Or we might just have a model that is a little bit more static. But either way, this is where the stored components would be, the certain structures that we always pull from. Now, the pathways it will take to do the work can be uncertain, but really the controllers are kind of the gatekeepers of the whole process. And you can see everything basically flows through that controller. And then ultimately, when we're going back to our browser to generate some output, it has to go through the view. So hopefully that lends a little bit of clarity as to how MVC works. But that's really kind of an important component here because we are going to be taking different parts of our code and having it do different things in little pieces. So we'll have files that represent things. We'll have files that execute certain code. We'll have files that interact with the database. And I think that if you start analyzing, at least conceptually, what's going on there, it's a very, very powerful architecture. And once you get used to how it works, it will, kind of unleash a lot of possibilities for you. All right, at this point, we're going to actually go ahead and pull in a new managed bean. So what we're going to do is we're going to do exactly what's shown here. We're going to right-click on the root of the project, and then we're going to get a menu. We're going to choose New, and then we're going to look for this. So let me go ahead and do that. So this is our new project here. Click on New, and then you're going to see that I have the managed bean listed here. Now, it's possible that depending on if you've used NetBeans before or not, and what components you've worked with, that you will get different options listed here. So if you don't see JSF managed bean, what you'll want to do is come down to Other, and then you'll search through what you need. And then notice that you can do a filter here, so you can find the stuff that you need pretty quickly. But once again, I would encourage you to actually look at some of the stuff that's in here, and just gives you some ideas of all the different things that are possible. The fact that we have all these libraries available to us is no small thing. All right, so let's go ahead and do the manage bean. We're following the instructions in the book now. So it says enter this and select the following fields. So class name will be time bean. And then I'm going to see if I can actually get this stuff all on the screen at the same time so I can see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Take a little creative screen resizing. So back to new managed bean. So the class name is going to be time bean. Now remember, I'm changing my package name here because I'm working on a second iteration of this. All right, so we have that package name in there. And then under name, notice the little discrepancy here, and it's not a discrepancy, it's done by intent, that our class name has got the capital T, which it must if you know your Java. And then our actual name here, it starts with a lowercase t, so we actually switch like traditional camel case. And then in terms of the scope, we are going to do a request. We're going to click finish, and that's going to create our bean. So now notice that we now have a Java file that was created, and you can see that the server stuff is like reacting. Actually not going to worry about that output for right now. In fact, I'm going to kind of minimize it and do a little screen arrangement here for side by side. All right, and the next thing that we need to do is add the getTime method to the project. So once again, we are going to actually do a little bit of stuff here. So, and notice it says that we need to look at listing 33.2, which is right here. And basically what we're going to do now is we're going to append some values to our time bean. So let's go ahead and do some of the work here. Notice there are some things that are already added to the file. And all the comments here, you can strike those if you wish, like I'm going to do. And then I want you to look at some of this stuff. Maybe this one I'll actually leave in there, although I would kind of like it to be truncated. More stuff on the screen. And it does this work basically automatically. So it pulls in the libraries that it needs. It imports them, and then we set up a couple of instances of things here. Now notice that what they're showing on the screen is a little bit different than what we're seeing on our screen, and I'm going to attribute that to the fact that Java may have updated, or they may have updated some components here that we have not yet seen. Notice in addition, and we need to go to the next page to see that addition. We are going to add some of these things here at the bottom of the next page. So you can see that we're adding this little tidbit here. I'm actually going to go ahead and actually type it in, which I could just copy paste from my source, but I think that I'll be nice and do it just like you guys are doing it, at least for now. And you can see it does a lot of the same things that Eclipse does in terms of auto typing and suggesting things. Now notice here I'm actually pulling in some classes, methods from those classes. Notice all the auto type stuff that it does. And in some ways I kind of like the auto type in NetBeans a little bit better than how it operates with an Eclipse. So that, of course, once again, is a little bit of a preference. If you haven't done so recently, go ahead and save your work. And let's move on to the next page. All right, I'm going to pull this back over just a little bit so we can get a little more on the screen. All right, now he goes through a couple little things here talking about what all the code does. So it says here, time bean is a Java beans with a named annotation that tells you that the framework will create and manage these objects. You have learned about override, right? And it's not that much different, really. It's added basically to help us, control things that are in the superclass or not control them, depending on your perspective, I suppose. Now, the other thing is that we're doing a request scope. And basically what that does is it sets up some parameters as to what we're exactly doing in the interaction in order to bring information back and forth through our app. Now at this point, we are also going to add some additional things. So now we're going to create a new page, and this is the name of it right here, currenttime.xhtml. And we're going to follow the steps that they show here in the book. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to right-click on the project node, the root node. And then we're going to choose New JSF Page. And you can see here that we're going to kind of mimic that there. So they want us to call it current time. Notice that these are all the same. We want to use facelets. And I want you also to notice here that I did mention Java Server Pages. And notice that that's still available here, but we are pointing towards the newer approach. All right, so now you can see it created a structure for us that we can work with. All right. So now we're going to move on and add some of the code that they're displaying here. So we're going to change some of these. Let's change our title to display current time. And then we're going to type in what they have there. The current time is. And then we're inserting a little bit of code here. Notice the format of the code. And I think that those of you that have been working with the Ruby stuff will recognize this approach as being a hash, basically. And syntax is not dissimilar. So it looks very much the same. let's go ahead and save. And then what that expression does, it says it obtains the current time. All right, and it tells you about what classes it belongs to. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And that you can see that it's giving me the exact same thing I had. And the reason for that is I didn't save, I don't believe. All right, and the other part here is that it's trying to run the whole project. And of course, when you run something that's on the web, it'll try to run the index page. So we're going to actually right-click the particular file that we're on, and we're just going to run that file. So directly to that output. So you can see it went in and it pulled out the date, the time zone, and the year. And that's what that particular method does. Now, they're indicating here that there's a few different things that you can do to adjust this, and you can feel free to experiment. But now we're going to move on to these graphical components. So these are going to be pretty important, in terms of creating output. And then I want you to notice that there's these prefixes that we use with JSF that will help us do our work. So notice that we have either H prefixes or F prefixes. And as we're working with H elements, you have to understand these go along with HTML. So when we will, for example, say H input text that creates a text box for us in HTML. So even though this will say something different here, if you actually look at the rendered output of the page, which is something you should get in the habit of doing, and I'm using the new Edge browser here, so I'm kind of fumbling with it a little bit, but you can see that the output is actually a lot different than what we're seeing here. We take these tags here and it tells the server to render head tags, right? And if you look here in the code, sure enough, here are some head tags. If you then take a look here, we're telling it to render body tags, and sure enough, it renders those. And inside there, we put in some text, and we run this little thing here, this expression, and then it gives us what we're looking for. So very much like PHP or ASP.NET, we are rendering stuff on the server side that will then appear within the browser. All right, let's jump back over to our text. And you can look at this list. And then also please understand that whenever you see the F prefix, that is part of the core tag library. And hopefully we'll be talking about that shortly as well. Now the thing that we're going to do next is we are going to work with this student registration form. Now the thing that I'm going to do, because I've already created this file, is I'm going to go ahead and actually pull it in from the other version or from the other project. So this is one of the web page files. So we're going to open that up, and this is student registration form. I'm just going to grab it and bring it over to right here. And now I moved it, and that was probably maybe not the best choice. Maybe a copy would be better. So let's paste it so it goes back in so I still have it. And I'm going to do that a little bit because basically I want to kind of accelerate my workflow here a little bit and not spend all the time talking. So let's take this file now. We'll give it a double click so we can look inside and see what's there. And the author goes through and he points out a number of different things. Now, some of these things I think are pretty intuitive, but notice that we are adding now to the namespace, not just the H prefix, but the F prefix as well. So it adds basically another reference here. You can see that some of this now we're familiar with. So we're doing an H to do a head, an H to do a body, and now we're doing an H to do a form. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create the standard HTML tag, and then inside we're going to have another one of these H tags, if you want to call them that. And you can imagine what this one's going to do. It says H graphic image, name of the file, and the library is called image. Now that gives us the implication that we have that file already available, and we're going to talk about that in a second, as you'll see. Notice also that we have some things that sound really familiar. So this should sound familiar from some of the Java effects stuff. So we're going to have a paneled grid, kind of like a grid pane. And then inside that, we are going to have a number of different labels for fields and input boxes. So really what's going to happen is we're going to be creating something that looks like this. So for example, output label, there it is. Then we got our input text, there it is, etc. And you can see that these will keep breaking down, and we'll have all these different things. And then, if you're wondering about the column count, if you think about what's going on here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's why it is. So, and then you can keep reading through, and you'll notice that in a couple of spots we're using some of the F tags. And in one case here, where we got a radio button that we're creating, we would have both a label and a value. So if we clicked on mail, we then would get the value of mail that we can pass along to our program. There's also combo boxes, check boxes, and a text area, just so you get the idea of how to work with all those. And then finally, a button to submit. So that's the code for that. And we're going to talk about that graphic in just a moment, because you'll see that if it's not there, it's not going to render, obviously. And they go through and they give you a breakdown of all the different things that are happening here. All right. And we want to now go ahead and create a folder where we can put our images. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to right click, we're a new folder, and we're going to call it, what are they calling it here? Image folder. And notice that if you are looking for that particular thing, well, I'll show you where to get it. I actually have it copied already into my project, but if you have the source files for the textbook, or if you remember, like in Eclipse, we had all those files, those images that we pulled in. This graphic is within that repository. All right. Once again, they're mentioning, and I think that's worthy of saying something, if you right-click on the project node and bring up that interface to create a new folder, you don't see that new folder, always look in that other thing at the bottom, and you should be able to find it. Now, here they're actually telling us to call the folder name resources. So I'm going to do what they say, because we want to follow along. And then they want us to just go ahead and click finish. Now they want us to create another folder using the same approach, and this time it's going to sit inside that area. And here I'm going ahead and I'm expanding some of this stuff. And I notice that I'm not seeing the folder I just created, which concerns me a little bit, because I'm just wondering if I did it correctly. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is, I don't know if I maybe hit cancel by mistake or something, but I'm going to go ahead and do this step once again, because I do want to make sure that you guys get it, and I want to make sure I have it available too. And I'm just wondering if I missed something here, and I don't think so. But it does want us to create that new folder right off of web pages. And maybe that's what I did wrong. I'm not really quite sure. Let's go ahead and create resources. Click finish. Okay, there it is this time. Right, you see nothing in it. And then we're going to create another new folder. And this one will be called image. Okay, and I apologize. I thought I was paused there as I was looking around, but I wasn't. So I apologize for that. We do now want to actually grab this icon wherever you might have it. Um, for me, I have it somewhere in my Google Drive here in the Java 2 folder. And then as you go in here and look at the source code, maybe it's not even there. There we go, image file. And the one that they want is usicon.gif. It's going to be near the bottom somewhere. All right. And what's kind of cool about NetBeans as well is the fact that we can actually drag stuff directly into it if we wish. So I can just bring it and drop it right into that folder, and you can see that there it is. So now that the page will actually recognize that it's there. Now they go through and they talk about all the different components on the page, and I know you can read that. We've already kind of talked about it a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, they probably want us to actually go ahead and render this page. Let's do that and see what it looks like. So we're going to be rendering the student registration form. We'll click on Run File, and you can see that it comes up. So by using that syntax that we saw, we were able to create this HTML form. Once again, I would encourage you to look at the output, and then I do want you to see that some of the stuff that's being generated here is done all automatically for us. And that's really one of the advantages of using a framework that's pre-built. You can see the output here. It knows to structure stuff inside of a table. It knows that by virtue of the grid panel that we're putting in. And all the H tags have been converted to regular HTML fields, pre-named. Notice some of the interesting syntax that they have in here, and those are programmatically important. So it's kind of good to let the software do it itself. And I'm not really sure what else to say about this, but I think it's pretty obvious how it works. The one commonality that you're going to see between using this approach and let's say maybe ASP.NET is that when we get past the body tag, everything else on the page is in the form. So the second last tag you're going to see here is form body. And that, so it's very similar to, let's say, like a Windows form application in that sense. All right, as we move forward here, we're now going to be working with this particular file, which is a Java file that we're actually used to process some of the form elements. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this in from my previous iteration here. And it looks like I scrolled down a little bit too far. And for those of you that are working with the book source code, you can actually pull these files in directly from the book. And I would actually encourage that as you're working through these demonstrations, because I think that you'll find that really helpful. All right, not to mention it'll save you a whole bunch of time typing. Now just make sure that you go back into the right spot here. So source, demo, and into that folder. So for this project, we're going to go to source. Here it's the name default package, that's fine, and we'll paste. All right, so as we take a look inside this file, you guys are going to notice a lot of standard Java syntax, and just like the previous bean that we were looking at, there's basically the standard approach of just building a class file. Notice that all that's really going on here is a bunch of getters and setters for all the different components that we would see embedded into the form. Now notice that we also have this little more complicated section here, which really isn't that complicated, but really what it's doing is it's going ahead and it's grabbing all the information and then it's returning the information in a particular way. So it's just taking the content that we entered and then it's just doing an output, and notice the output is HTML with a whole bunch of concatenation symbols in between. Not too dissimilar from working with a lot of our other languages, including PHP. In PHP, if we were doing this, we would say echo here, and then all the plus signs would be periods, and then all the variable names would have dollar signs in front of them. But really, otherwise, it really is all the same in terms of concept. All right, let's move on to the next page here, where they show us basically all the code. Let's move on to the page after that. And then once again, let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Now, this is going to be attached, mind you, to our registration page. So really the page that we're going to run is this one. And actually that was probably already up in the browser. And then you can see we get an error. And really what's happening is that we don't have all the stuff built that will make this page go. So if you see something like this, don't get into a panic, you didn't do anything wrong. This is actually kind of expected. All right, let's now move on to this next part here where we have this additional HTML form we're going to throw in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and once again copy that file from my previous efforts, which is this one. So I'm going to copy and come down to my other project here, and I'm going to paste into the root of that folder, and there it is. And once again, let's take a look at this file, and we can see that it is an XHTML file, so it has a lot of the components that we've seen already. But now notice that inside the value field for some of these form objects, we are basically programmatically pulling upon the Java bean that we created and components from the form. So that's pretty powerful. Also notice, as we're working on things, that it's possible to apply to the tags all your standard attributes, including styling elements. That stuff can all be controlled programmatically as well. All right. So now if we actually go ahead and run this form and hit the button, it is actually going to give us output. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to run this again. And I know it's already open, but let's do it fresh. Here, I'm not sure if it actually did it, but let's go ahead and make sure this is saved. I didn't change anything, but at the same time, I don't want it to fail. Of course, I had clicked on the wrong file, so that is kind of an issue in and of itself. And I'm not sure what's happening, so I'm actually going to go ahead and close some of these pages here. And I don't know if this is the error that was just generated, but we're going to find out in just a moment. And actually, I have a couple of suspicions as to what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and try to run this again. Maybe now it'll launch. Okay, excellent. And then, let's put some information in here. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then hypothetically, it should spit back the stuff. But really what's happening is that we're not running the correct one. So let's run this one. And once again, let's fill it out. Now you can see it's spitting back the information. Seems like a pretty simple thing, but it actually did a lot of powerful work without really a whole lot of effort. Yes, it does take a little while to learn these tags, but I think that once you work with it for a bit in like a production environment, you'll be a master of it in no time. All right, this video ends here, and I'm going to pick up with another video shortly, so move on to that second video.